Kate Fisher, SABC News correspondent, joins us live now for more on this story. Kate, thank you so much for your time. I mean, the summit comes at a time when there are so many developments geopolitically, including the conflict in the Middle East, the ongoing war in Ukraine. How much of these can also overshadow the discussions there?
Yeah, well, I think all of those issues are going to make it really tough for these leaders to actually find any common ground on some of the most controversial issues. For example, the war in Ukraine. Already several members have not yet condemned Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, as the Western members, such as the US and Europe, have called on them to do so. That's a big sticking point, as is the ongoing conflict in Gaza, and of course climate change as well. This G20 is, for a rare occurrence, taking place at the same time as COP29, where there has been a stalemate over climate financing goals, with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calling on the leaders here to solve that stalemate and find some kind of resolution, saying essentially they hold the purse strings. They represent 85% of the world's economy, and they're all meeting here right now, but they're also representing 80% of the world's emissions, and Antonio Guterres says they have a responsibility to do something about it. There does seem to have been some progress among the leaders on a fragile consensus on climate financing. The big sticking point is that some of the more wealthy countries in Europe, for example, want some of the developing countries who are growing in wealth to contribute more. Those developing countries, several of them don't want to do that. But there is, looks like I've got the writing to say that they will make voluntary contributions. That falls a little bit short of obligations, but leaders say it is some progress. But of course, all of this may change come next year when Donald Trump takes office in the White House. The US is the world's biggest economy. Donald Trump is a climate skeptic and pulled out of the Paris Accords in the last time he was in the Oval Office, and he may do again this time. So many of these countries may be wondering kind of what's the point in trying to pursue this if the world's biggest economy may well be pulling out of it at a later date. And
especially because, you know, some are looking to this particular gathering to then have meaningful declarations, for example, regarding geopolitics. But one wonders then, how does the issue of debt negotiations and the rising debt for African countries begin to be dealt with, especially if some of these countries are coming from so far different places?
Yeah, this is it. It's very difficult when the world's attention appears to be on these conflicts in the Middle East and Europe. But Brazil, who is presiding over this meeting before South Africa takes it over, it says its real desire is to get agreements about the fight for poverty and hunger, especially amongst the global south. What it's trying to say that is something it feels that can be achieved given all the differences over the other issues that we've just talked about. And so this morning leaders met for a specific summit on fighting hunger and poverty, and Brazil is hoping for as many countries as possible to sign on to agreement. It says it already has 81 countries signed on to this. So that is something that it's trying to work out that, you know, will affect more African countries than a war in Europe or the Middle East. But certainly it is an issue, and it's one that I think the G20 is trying to solve by the fact that it's going to have its meeting in South Africa next year, the first time it's occurred on the African continent.
And when, you know, you're looking at, of course, the number of closed sessions are taking place, there's a lot of focus for some to try and see what the deliberations would have been in the year and what do they agree upon now. There are a number of, you know, concerns, for example, for Africa. You think about illicit financial flows, you think about sustainable development, etc. What are some of the other sessions that we can then expect as these leaders are now finalizing these particular discussions in Brazil, and a whole lot of more focus now shifts towards South Africa, for example?
Yeah, well, as I said, Brazil's focus is on hunger and poverty. But the other sessions that it's also hosting include global governance and the reform of that. But I think a lot of what people are focused on here, we're hearing from analysts, kind of behind the scenes, chats in corridors, etc., is what the new US president will mean for these countries. How will Donald Trump's return to the White House affect them coming forward? It's very difficult, they feel, to make plans and agreements when they don't know what the most powerful country in the world is going to do come January. And although that's obviously not on the agenda here, there's not a specific meeting about Donald Trump, and he's not here himself, his return to the White House is certainly looming over everything, and we understand that is a lot of what the conversation is about, and also discussions of his new cabinet members and what, for example, the new Secretary of Defense, the new Secretary of State will mean for relationships between these countries going forward.
And I suppose, of course, it also puts under the spotlight what President Joe Biden is saying, that, you know, there's no going back on clean energy revolution, as he visited there, the Amazon forest. And that, even in itself, he can say it, but certainly, as you say, a lot can change when Donald Trump takes over, given the unpredictability of the entire situation. But Kate, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And as you say there's a lot of focus on some of these issues, but how much of this can in fact continue, you know, as far as the United States is concerned? Because remember, Donald Trump will take over in January next year, and there have been a number of issues that he has been very, very skeptical about, including climate change as well. So certainly quite a lot of focus on what he does when he takes over the Oval Office. That's Kate Fisher, the SABC News correspondent, coming to us live from Brazil.